Hey guys, welcome to one of the first weekly public JPT live streams, and I'm going to be doing this at this time every Saturday, so if you guys would like to tune in, this is going to be happening weekly just at this time. So in this live stream, I wanted to just kind of talk about my favorite Linux distribution, Linux Mint. I'm going to talk about why I like it and what I think makes a good Linux distribution. And if you guys have your favorite Linux distribution that you want to put in the comments, of course, feel free to do that and say why you like it as well to start a little kind of discussion if you'd like to. So, yeah, just in the chat, just please don't swear and don't spam. It's not cool, and yeah, it's just annoying. Don't do those things and we'll be alright. Just remember, if you're going to post a comment, just make sure it's something that contributes to the video. And also, I am on Patreon, and I do upload content to Patreon, exclusive ad-free Patreon-only content. And a subscription on JPT for Patreon is only $5 a month if you guys are interested, for exclusive weekly content over there, ad-free too. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Hello everybody. I'm going to start with my favorite Linux distribution. My favorite Linux distribution is Linux Mint. And there's a reason Linux Mint is my favorite Linux distribution. Obviously. There's a reason. So, many reasons really, but I mean, it kind of depends on what you look for in a Linux distribution to decide whether it's your favorite or not. You know, different people have different favorites because different people have different wants or needs out of a Linux distribution. But I started using Linux Mint on the latest version was version 19.2 Tina, and the first version I downloaded was 19.2 Tina Cinnamon 32-bit to run it on an old netbook that I have, and I honestly liked the experience, and I still use it to this day, just because it's a lot. You know, there are a lot of reasons. Alright, so Magician on here says their favorite Linux distro is Gentoo, and I've never actually used Gentoo, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on why you like Gentoo, if you could. Anyway, Linux Mint, I've used it pretty much ever since I first installed it because it was just, one, it's very stable. It's a very stable Linux distribution. It's based off the LTS releases of Ubuntu. But I feel like it takes all the stuff that I don't really like about Ubuntu out of it. Like, it takes out all the built-in snaps, which I think is great. I'm not much of a fan of snaps. And just using the last few releases of Ubuntu, I've noticed that it just kinda is slow with the snaps. The snaps are very slow, and whenever I try to install something from the software store, it will usually install both the apt package and the snap package, at least from my experience. It will install both of them, and there will be two shortcuts for the same app on my in my application menu. But they're actually two different apps because they're in two different packages. So then, you know, my configuration on one app won't be the same as in a different app. So all my saves won't be, you know, it's just, it really mixes it all up. There's a lot of things I don't like about Ubuntu, and Linux Mint just gets rid of all of that, which is great. I do love that about Linux Mint, and I think I like how much they're focused on a desktop experience. The Cinnamon desktop environment is a great desktop environment. And from just using it, it feels like they were going for like a sort of minimalist, clean, polished, and efficient desktop. And that's really what it's come out to be, honestly. I'm using Linux Mint for this live stream right now, obviously on a crappy laptop with a crappy camera, but that's how it is right now. And Cinnamon it's a very familiar desktop. I'm already familiar with it. I already know, like, being a Windows user, it's pretty familiar for me to use. I learned how to use it in 5 minutes, but there are a lot of things I like about it that I feel are actually very superior to Windows, because even though it kind of does resemble Windows, it's definitely cleaner than Windows, I feel like. And I don't know, there's just a lot of little features that are very well polished that I think Windows could definitely do with a polish like that. But with Linux Mint, the Cinnamon desktop environment, it's a great desktop environment, and it doesn't look super attractive. Like, they don't load it with attractive animations and stuff like that, like KDE, for example. It's no KDE. It's not that attractive, but KDE also is not as stable as Cinnamon. It has so many extensions and so many add-ons and so many just options that it can be really easy to kind of mess it up a little bit. And Cinnamon, while it doesn't look as great, it does look pretty good. It looks polished and it looks consistent, which is what is important to me. And it's like the perfect mix between a bloated desktop like KDE, for example, and bare bones desktop like LXDE, for example. You know, I don't like bloated, but I don't like bare bones either. I kind of like something in the middle, and I think that's where Cinnamon sits, is right there in the middle. So it's a very good desktop environment for me, and I love the Linux Mint theming that goes along with it. The accent colors, I feel like, are a cool idea, and they work great in Linux Mint too. So does the dark theme. I love using the dark theme with Linux Mint, but with the accent colors, I actually just keep it on the default one because that's the color I prefer. My favorite color is green, so I just keep it as the default green accent color. So, yeah. There is one thing I don't like too much about Linux Mint, though, and it's about snaps again. I know that the Linux Mint team really does not like snaps. They hate snaps, right? But I feel like blocking snaps, at least by default, is a little excessive. But then in their known issues page, they literally tell you what file to delete to be able to install snaps, which I think is a little excessive. I agree with not having any apps come installed as snap and not having the snap daemon, snapd, I guess, installed by default. I do agree with that, but I also kind of like to be able to have choice on Linux, which Linux Mint does really well, but they just block snaps, and it kind of takes away that choice. But then, of course, you can delete that file that blocks the snaps, but then at that point, it's like, what's the point of that file being there in the first place? Just don't have snaps included, but if someone wants to install them, why would you block them from installing it? Especially if you're telling them how to delete that block, and, you know, it just creates an extra roadblock, which I think is a little unnecessary, but hey, it's there. I mean, can't have everything right. So it also handles updates really well. I mean, I get a nice little notification. I know they just revamped their update manager, but it does handle updates very well. It tells you how many software updates and how many security updates you have, for example, and it gives you a really clean way to update it. And it just always stays consistent. I feel like with Ubuntu does not deserve to be the king of the Linux desktop anymore. I mean, back in the early 2000s, maybe it was a good distribution, but now it's not, honestly. It's really pretty bad. I mean, it makes you think that the Canonical developers, the Canonical is the company behind Ubuntu, it really makes you think that the Canonical developers don't actually use Ubuntu because it's just so bad. Like, do they even use Ubuntu Desktop? They probably don't, honestly, because I bet if they did, they would work harder to really improve it, because it does need some improvements. I mean, the snaps, I mean, I could go off on a whole tangent about how annoying snaps are. So, anyway, with Linux Mint, you can always expect the next release to be better than the last one. They don't go up and down in a roller coaster like Ubuntu kind of does. Like, Ubuntu will have a release that's good and bad, or then Windows will do, like, XP was great, Vista was 7 was better, 8 was 10 was a little bit better than that, and 11 is, well, I don't know, we'll see. But it's just a roller coaster with a lot of other operating systems on whether the next version will actually be any better than the last. And the thing I like about Linux Mint is that you can always expect Linux Mint to be better than the last version. It just keeps constantly improving. It doesn't ever go backwards. It doesn't backtrack. And I think that's a very valuable thing to have on a desktop operating system, is that you can trust upgrading, because you know that it's going to be better than what you already have. You know it's going to be better because it has the past 15 times you've upgraded to another version of Linux Mint. And Linux Mint's a very mature desktop environment. Like, by this point, they know what they're doing, they know what their purpose is, they know why they're doing it, and they know how to do it, and they're good at it. The Linux Mint team is really good at what they do, and they just create a great desktop operating system that I would use on any computer. And my second favorite distribution, we're going to kind of shift topics now. I think this is based on Linux Mint, but it might be Ubuntu based, I don't really know, is Farron OS. Now, it's not as popular as Linux Mint, but some of you Linux people have probably heard about it out there. Farron OS is a great little Linux distribution. It uses the KDE desktop environment, but it uses a highly modified version of the KDE desktop environment to make it look a little bit more like Cinnamon, honestly, but as KDE. It looks very familiar to Windows, and it's beautiful. It has these flashy animations and transparency and all the effects, the window effects, everything is just beautiful. It's just a beautiful desktop environment and a beautiful distro. But the reason I prefer Linux Mint is because I feel like Farron OS, it kind of changes and shifts a lot, and just from using it, it's pretty stable, don't get me wrong, but it's not as stable as Linux Mint is. And it's the same thing with Ubuntu Unity, which is a relatively new Linux distribution. It's meant to revive Ubuntu with the Unity desktop environment, which is what Ubuntu used from 2011 to 2017 or something like that. But basically, Ubuntu Unity is the same thing as, not the same thing as Farron OS. They're actually two completely different things, but it's the same problem with Farron OS. It's a great new concept. It's a great distro, but Farron OS and Ubuntu Unity, which are probably number 2 and 3 for my favorite distros, they're just not mature yet. Linux Mint is a mature desktop environment distro, not desktop environment. Linux Mint is a very mature distro that continually gets better with each release. And when I say mature, I mean they know what they're doing, they're really good at doing it, and they stick to it, And Farron OS and Ubuntu Unity are kind of fluctuating in their stability. While I do think they'll get there, they just aren't as mature as I'd like them to be yet to be able to use them as a daily driver, because they do have noticeable bugs throughout using it just on a daily basis. bugs that I don't run into on Linux Mint, especially bugs with the user interface, especially with Ubuntu Unity. And once they get to a mature point, I might consider them using a daily driver, but for now, I'm going to stick with Linux Mint. Right now, Linux Mint is my favorite desktop environment. Jeez, today I'm mixing up my words. Distro, not desktop environment. Linux Mint is my favorite distro. And yeah. So thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, like I said, I'm going to start doing these at this time every Saturday. And also I have exclusive weekly content ad-free on Patreon. It's actually this corner right here. Yeah, Patreon. Guys can go over there and support the channel for just $5 a month and get access to all that exclusive content. That will be coming soon. So thank you guys so much.